Welcome to another episode of Game Changers for Government Contractors. I am your host, Michael LeJeune. And if you are brand new to our podcast, let me first welcome you and thank you for coming in and checking us out. I think you're going to get a lot of value out of this. This episode is number 363. It is the art of negotiation in government contracting. And I can tell you there's 362 amazing episodes that are before this. And there's hundreds more that are coming after this. A lot of other content we put out there. So if you are a content junkie and you really want to just learn this market, whether you're brand new or you've been in it for a long time, there's a lot of stuff that we have to offer. One of the things I'll recommend before I get into the podcast here today is our community. I highly recommend you check out our community. It meets weekly every Wednesday. It's called Inner Circle. You can go to federalaccess.com and learn more about our community there, where we not only meet weekly, you can email us anytime you have a question. And we have a bunch of people in the community that you can probably team with and work with and, brainstorm with. So that's really good to have people that are kind of like-minded working with you. Then we also have a ton of resources that will help you elevate your game to the next level. So enough about that. Let me jump in and talk about the art of negotiation today with you. So I think it's really important to understand pricing and negotiation. Those two are a little bit different, but they go together. When you're in this market, you are often going to be asked to negotiate your price when the government is getting close to making an award. They may be negotiating just with you. They may be negotiating with a couple of different people. If you are on a contract vehicle like GSA, one of the last things they do before they award your schedule to you is they go through negotiations with you. And hey, they try to get a little bit better pricing, even though you've already given them your best pricing or whatever. And so you really need to understand how that works in the government space. And so in order to do this, there are a handful of things that I think are really important. I'm going to walk through these. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I apologize. I'm going to look off screen at my notes because I want to make sure I hit all these bullet points. If you're just listening on the podcast, you won't notice that. So thank you for just listening. So let me jump in and start talking about these. The first one is really understanding the government's priorities. Like, why is that important, right? Well, if you understand what the agency values most, you can understand if they value cost savings, risk reduction, performance, innovation, whatever it may be. Because when you start to look at what an agency is doing, like let's take Space Force, for example. Space Force probably isn't as concerned about cost savings as they are at risk reduction and performance. You go over to another agency and that may be different. You could go to an agency like FEMA and they probably aren't going to be concerned about cost either when they're in the middle of a disaster. They're trying to do things. So may have a little bit higher cost there. If you understand what the agency's priorities are, you understand where to negotiate, but more importantly, what to emphasize in a proposal. Because have you ever been in a store like Walmart and you have two options, but one comes with a better guarantee and some different features, and you're like, you know what, I'm willing to pay the extra $10 for this to get these better features. Or a better example would be on Amazon. We're on Amazon and you see almost identical product, but one of them comes with a few more gadgets than the other one, and it's about the same price. Like I was just buying a new sourdough bread starter kit this week. And as I was doing that, I was like, well, there's this one scale that I really like. There's a one jar that I really like. And I could get the whole kit for $35 over here, but I don't necessarily like the items in it as much as if I bought them individually. If I bought them individually, it's going to be $25 versus $35. And I don't really need the extra stuff. So in this situation, I was like, I'm going to go with a cheaper one because it's really the jar that I want. I want this particular, I know it sounds geeky, but I really wanted this particular jar. And I wanted this scale because of the way it just is set up. And it looks different than the one I had. And that's really important to me. And so I went with that one. Now, there's other things I've bought recently where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to pay more because it has more gadgets, more benefits, more stuff in the box, whatever it may be. So when you understand the priorities, you understand what to emphasize when you start to go through things. And that's really where understanding your customer comes in really important, because you can charge a little bit more if you bring a little more to the table. You understand what I'm saying there? So that's a big thing. So the other thing, and this kind of ties into that, is really just mastering what I would call your pre-negotiation research. And that goes to the next level. It's still understanding the priorities, but it goes to the next level of understanding, well, what's the budget? What have some of the past awards been in? What have the competitor prices look like? You know, what are some of the agency pain points? Because maybe I need to bring in this gadget versus that one, or this service versus that one, or two people versus one people on a contract. And if you understand what's happened in the past, it can help shape your proposal so that your proposal is more in line with what the agency wants. And if it's more in line with what they want, hopefully they're willing to pay a little bit more for it. And so you're negotiating in these stages without even discussing it with the customer because of the way you're laying out your proposal and you're doing the right research. Now, I often recommend building relationships nonstop, but if you layer in relationships before negotiations, then you can establish trust with the contracting officers and program managers and decision makers well before you do this. So if you are showing up cold to a meeting to negotiate pricing and they don't know you, they're not going to trust you. That's just the bottom line. But if you have built a relationship, even if you haven't sold anything, but you've built a relationship through maybe some sources sought, through some RFIs, through some cold calls where you called in and just had a quick conversation or two here and there over the past month or two, 6 months, and you've done that, you've reached out on LinkedIn, you've commented on their stuff, and they have some familiarity with you, there's a level of trust that's different with you than different from the cold person that's bidding. And even a minor amount of trust can make them say, this really is the best price because this person, I've talked to them for a while. I feel good about this conversation and I'm not going to push them as hard. And that's the thing. When you have a better relationship, you don't push as hard. So think about that, like with your kids. You likely won't negotiate as hard with your kids as you would the used car salesman that you just met yesterday, right? It's going to be a different situation. And so building trust makes negotiations easier on both parties. You trust them, they trust you. You're probably coming to the table with your best pricing. You're explaining it well because you've gone through the research and you've just set yourself up for success by doing all of these right things. And that's how you get really good pricing on this. The other one is you really want to understand what your value is that you bring to the table. A lot of people talk about your value prop and all that. You really want to understand and be able to clearly articulate that value beyond the price. Because if you're just talking about, hey, it's this much and everybody else in the market is this much, that's not really articulating the value. But what do you really bring to the table? Why is your solution better? Whether it's a product or service, why is it better to go with you and pay this price? And if you can start to clearly articulate that, then you very quickly start to build that rapport with the customers. And they're like, well, I really want to go with this one because all things being equal, this is a better deal for the government. It's just the way it is. And so if you're doing those things, it will help everything. The other thing is understanding like contract terms, hidden risks, things like that. You need to be able to go through and scrutinize and say, look, for what they're asking us to do, for this level of uptime, for this level of performance, for this level of speed, like they're requesting this, this is a project that normally takes a year and they're asking us to do it in 3 months. For what they're requesting, there needs to be a premium paid for that. And when you understand the contract terms and the hidden risks and all those different things like that, you can strengthen your position. Which brings me to the next point. If you really want to strengthen your position, do it with data. Back your negotiations with data, whether it's past performance metrics of other contracts you've worked on, market analysis, cost justification, competitor pricing, past awards. Be able to bring the data to the table to strengthen your position on your price. Because there's nothing worse than showing up and saying, well, this is the price because I feel like we're worth it. Okay, well, maybe you are, but you haven't justified why you're worth it. So show up to the table, being able to justify your position. And that way the customer knows, oh, well, if you look at the market, this is actually below what the current market is charging and where it's going. Or this is in line with what the market is, but they're delivering all these values and benefits above this. And they're doing all, and so if you bring the data to the table, you make the case easier for them to justify choosing you. And that's really what it's all about. And so one of the next things that I think is really important is you need to know when to push and when to concede. You need to prioritize key deal points, where you're going to be flexible, where you're looking at critical areas that, hey, if we're doing this, we need to make sure that we're getting this price because there's this other cost associated with it or this risk associated with it. Because when you're negotiating, you're not just negotiating price. You're often also negotiating deliverables to say, look, we can do this for this price, but we're going to have to change the timetable. You're not going to get this in 3 months. We can do it in 6. So we'll do this price, but you're going to have to concede on the timetable. Can you do that? And so people often think negotiating is just about price, where kind of like a used car where they're like, well, I want 10,000 for the car. Well, I'm only willing to pay 6. Well, you meet me in the middle, and they kind of come up with a price, right? That's not what it's about. Even when you're doing a used car, you can say, look, I'm willing to do this price, but I want free oil changes for a year. I want whatever it is, right? Like you can I want you guys to not only detail it, but I want you to fill up the tank, and I want, a new spoiler or radio. I've done that before. I've negotiated a brand new radio in a car before because I'm like, that's what I want in order to do that price. Can you do that? And we got the deal done. So you can get the deal done sometimes by going outside of price, but you need to know when to concede and when to push, because you can push and, quote, win the deal and really tick off your customer. And that's not what you want. You don't want that. You don't want to push so hard that you upset the relationship and they never work with you again. So you want to do all of the other things that I'm talking about so that you can build a relationship. You can back it with data. You can understand where you're coming from. So when you get to the table, if and when there's a negotiation, you are not fighting for every penny because you haven't done your work. So if you do all the other things that I've said, negotiation becomes really, really easily. And the last thing I'll throw out there is handling sole source versus competitive negotiations is very different. On a sole source contract, you're likely not going to have to push too hard on the pricing, whereas competitive negotiations, you're going to have to sharpen the pencil. You're going to have to get very creative on that, and you're likely not going to get the most profit on a competitive one. And that's where you need to understand on those competitive ones, you need to do your best, but you're going to have to concede some way, shape, or form in order to win that contract so you can position yourself for the next one. So be open-minded to that. And I'm going to leave you with this. If you have questions about negotiations, which this might have been a little bit different podcast than you were thinking about. You might have thought it was just going to be about pricing. This is a lot about strategy and pre-work that you need to do. But if you have additional questions about negotiation or anything government contracting, you can reach out to me, whether you have a comment to this video or you shoot us an email, whatever it may be. But again, I want to leave you with one thought. If you're doing this journey alone or you have a small team and you're struggling in any way, consider joining our community. Reach out to us, join that Wednesday community where you can reach out anytime you have a question. You can connect with myself, my partner, Josh. You can get access to all of our resources, but more importantly, you don't have to do this journey alone anymore. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Tune in next week. We're going to have another great episode. We'll see you next time.